Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 175, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
Now, just before we start this week's show, I do have to pre-warn you, I have eaten an entire pack of refreshers before we started today.
That's really weird, because I've just had a refresher as well.
No way. When was the last time you had a pack of refreshers?
A long time ago, and I had one today.
It was a weird,
This isn't
powdery
planned.
kind of sweet. Yeah.
I've literally just got home from work. I bought them yesterday, didn't have it, scoffed it, and then got in the car and came straight here. That's so bizarre.
That's me and Joe bouncing off the walls then for the next hour.
Is there a sale on in your area?
I don't know. Mine was a super sour apple bag, so I was just like, yeah, have that.
I was leaving the house here and I saw it on the side and my missus must have left it there, so I thought, oh, little energy boost before the podcast. So there you go, I'll try and slow down and not talk too quickly today. Now, we have got an amazing podcast lined up for you this week. Not only will we run through all the retro gaming stories that have been making the headlines this week as well, new games announced for the Mega Drive Mini, and a weird little console with a hand crank control on that's been making the headlines everywhere this week. And we have a brilliant guest. Now, this week on the podcast, a couple of friends of ours are going to be joining us.
Yeah, so we've got the Guru Meditation, and they're a team, basically. Bill Winters and Anthony Becker. And they're awesome. They've been running an Amiga group since 1988, and it's still running today.
They don't look old enough.
No, and Bill actually started his video work on the Amiga, so it's going to be a bit of a special today. And now he's got to the level that he films all the presidents. So basically, he's filmed most of the presidents of modern ages.
Every time I speak to Bill, he's away filming for like massive international companies.
Oh, TV adverts. You know all those Old Spice adverts in America? He did quite a few of them. So.
Yeah, so very, very talented. And also he does, one of the videos I love that he did on his YouTube channel, which I'll link to in our show notes, was that one where he had that artist who was an old lady who'd been using an Amiga 1000 since the 80s. And
yeah.
For art,
There's loads of that stuff that we can cover. So loads of different areas. We're going to be talking more about the hardware side of Amiga rather than the gaming here, kind of the creativity and production.
Yeah, and also he streams a lot on Twitch as well, doesn't he? Does live streaming.
He's a big streamer.
So we'll be joined by the Guru Meditation in around 20 minutes on the Retro Hour podcast. Now, last week on the show, we were all reminiscing about the game shops that we went to back in the day. We kind of put it out there. We said, where did you go to buy your games as a kid? And what became of your retro gaming shop? We had loads of replies. It seems that this actually, did kind of push people's buttons. So I think everyone has memories of it, don't they?
Let's hear them. I'm interested.
I've got a few here. I picked out just a few. The first one is from Jonathan Adnett. And he said, living in Sheffield in the early 80s, my go-to place every Saturday was a place called Just Micro, the shop below Gremlin. A tiny shop, but always ran with kids playing on the display computers. Anytime you'd walk in, and a rep from US Gold was often there showing off coming releases. I saw Commodore 64 Outrun and 720 Degrees for the first time in that shop. Many fun memories. Last time I passed it was a carpet shop.
That sounds like a hell of a cool shop.
That seems to be the theme. What are they now?
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, imagine that. Like, you couldn't imagine going to a game shop now and the major publisher being in there go, hey guys, these are the new games that we've got
not
this
at
week.
all.
Yeah, we've got Squaresoft upstairs.
Yeah. Now you just walk in, you've got Dave with the velvet rope charging a $5 for the headset.
Yeah.
On the VR headset.
And we got one from Simon Boggy Burton. He used to go to Silica Shop in Sidcup. He spent every afternoon in there after school in the 80s, even having lock-ins when new games were delivered. He remembers 4 new Intellivision games being delivered at around 8:30 p.m. one night, and his folks used to phone and tell the shop owner when his tea was ready, so he'd go home. But
That's amazing.
You know who Simon is?
No.
When we go to Play Expo, he's the guy that runs all the arcades.
Oh, Simon,
Yes,
of course. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know his full name. I know Simon.
Yeah,
now.
you probably know him as Boggy.
Yeah, that's it. Carl Bubsy said Games World in Hammersmith in London used to go once a week with my pocket money to buy new Commodore 64 games, bought Robocop and Defenders of the Earth, the latter being absolute rubbish. He said it's now long gone. I think it's a bakery now, he said. And last one, Paul Henderson said it was a computer store in Doncaster back in the 80s. Loads of Amstrad CPC games from there as well. Sometimes went to Rotherham, to Crazy Joe's, and games were really cheap. Had a really good Amiga PD selection in there as well. And it's now CX, apparently. So
okay.
It is good to get stories, though, where people went to, get games and stuff back in the day before we all got them on Steam or Xbox Live and stuff. So.
And that's what Joe's shop would be called, Crazy Joe's.
Crazy Joe's. Straight away I was like, oh yeah, that would be mine.
Was that little click and you register in the website domain in the background there? So if you've got any more of those, the question we're asking is, where did you go to buy your retro games? What was the shop like? Tell us a bit about your experience. And if you know what it is today, you could drop us an email, show@theretrohour.com, or comment on our Facebook page. Now, before we get into our interview this week, just a quick shout to the people who keep this podcast going week in, week out, because, the Retro Hour podcast, it's a weekly show. We're into our 4th year of doing this podcast now, which is crazy. And hands up, honestly, we would not be doing the show if we didn't have your support, because, we couldn't afford to pay for this out of our own pocket for this long. So any donation that we get into the show really helps and all goes back into the running of it. And you can make a donation of any amount via PayPal. You'll find the link on our website at theretrohour.com. And for doing that, you will find your place in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame and get a mention on a future episode. Just like this week,
Krista Gordon,
Benjamin Leland,
S Solutions,
and Frank Elvin Fruntold,
who all made donations into the running of the show, and you can do the same at theretrohour.com. And let's just give a quick shout to another big supporter of the podcast as well, The Economist. Now, The Economist have been massive supporters of the Retro Hour, and we love them as well because, it's a publication that's been going here in Britain for over 170 years. That's nearly 2 centuries that they've been delivering trustworthy intelligence that helps people like us choose where we stand on issues that matter most. Now, as well as covering, the important stuff, economics, finance, politics, business, they also cover stuff like technology, the arts, and video games as well. Now, you're reading something really interesting about this change that's happening in casinos.
Yeah. So we've had a few guests that have actually talked about how they've originally started on fruit machines and then that kind of went into arcades, sharing a lot of the same technology. What they're saying at the moment in the casinos, people sit there with their 2Ps, all the old ladies, and they keep...
Or my wife when we go, usually.
They keep putting it in Las Vegas. Well, they're saying the average age of the kind of casino slot user is 58.
Wow.
So they're going to lose them soon and lose some of their...
soon. Forever the optimist.
and lose some of their profits. So what they're saying is they want to add skill stuff to them to make it more of a kind of a skill game. Now, I've seen in the UK where it's gone completely different.
Yeah.
And they've added these fixed odds betting terminals, and those things are scary. I walked past quite a poor area, and there was one guy, and he was a builder, and he got his whole wages, and it was probably about $6-7 grand, and he just put it on the machine, and everyone was gathered around and just lost it in like 5 minutes.
Wow.
And that was really, really scary. So I think there's 2 ways you can go with this. You can add skill, or you can add complete risk.
That's the thing. I've never found fruit machines that interesting, really. It's like I know it's a chance game, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
But if you're putting skill in there as well, I guess you're going to actually stay in the machines longer, which might keep people in the casino longer as well.
I've never seen myself, never had the appeal, growing up around Blackpool and stuff as well. Really exposed to it, but I just never got into fruit machines.
It's a whole industry in America, isn't it? They pump like fresh air in there to keep you kind of entertained and happy. And
When I was in Vegas, they were handing us free shots of Sambuca to, loosen up our pockets a little bit, I think. So, those are the kind of things you can read about in The Economist as well. Some really interesting in-depth articles that will really teach you stuff that you never realised and didn't know before. Now, we'd like to give you a free copy of The Economist through your door. Now, if you do this, not only will you be really helping out the podcast as well, but also you'll get to check out The Economist for free. So if you'd like a free print copy and you live in the UK, all you have to do is text the word retro and send it to 78070. So grab your phone right now. That's all you got to do. Text retro and send that to 78070 and get your free print copy of The Economist, the smart guide to the forces changing your world. Now, it's fair to say around the table here, we all enjoy handheld gaming. I've got a Switch, you have as well?
I'm fond of it. I don't have a Switch, actually.
You got a Lynx.
If that's my 30th birthday present, no, Dan.
Just giving it away, yeah. You're going to be so disappointed.
But I do have a
week.
Lynx. I do have several DSs, many Game Boys, many Game Boy Advances as well.
You've got a Switch.
Game Gear. My fiance's got a Switch. Yeah, I nicked that, yeah.
It's one thing, though, when you're playing your handhelds, do you ever think, I wish it had a hand crank on it?
Every time. I'm sat there playing Resident Evil on the DS, and I'm like, I just need to feel this crank. I just need to get in the zone.
Well, this is a new console, a handheld console that looks a little bit like a bit of a Game Boy kind of rip-off. This is called the Playdate.
That is a weird name for a console, isn't it? The Playdate. I always thought the PlayStation was a weird thing. It sounded like some kind of masturbation aid. Sorry, I have to cut that out.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I don't even want to know what visions a Playdate brings for you, Ravi. But, they've unveiled this handheld system now, and they're aiming to break the rules of most games consoles. Now, if you look at it, there is a little video that they've posted on Twitter, and it does look a bit like a yellow Game Boy. Interestingly, it has a black and white screen. So, I mean, it's not monochrome, it's literally black and white.
Well, there were a few games with those hand cranks. Do you remember the Sega bass fishing one?
On the Dreamcast.
On the Dreamcast, there were quite a few.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the vibe they've got. Like, obviously they're going for like, you're cranking it and you're moving your little guy along.
Yeah.
But it's such a novelty. Surely it's not going to take off. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's saying here it's going to be $149.
Yeah.
And it's black and white as well, and they're going to do a kind of limited version of it.
This is the kind of thing like when like a relative's like, I've got you a really good birthday present, and you're just like, oh, thanks, knowing like they've spent so much money on it, and you're just going to play it once.
It's quite a successful publisher though. The guys who did Firewatch.
Yeah.
So maybe there might be some integration with a game like. If you just crank, you get extra stuff on your PC. I don't know.
But this one game they're showing
rewards,
on their tweet, it's called Crankin's Time Travel Adventure. And looking at it, I mean, there is a D-pad on there, and there are, a couple of action buttons too. But they're kind of moving the main character along with the crank on the side.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me a bit of like those all kind of mechanical games in a way. It's got a bit of kind of an Etch-a-Sketch kind of vibe going on.
That's what it reminded me of, like Etch-a-Sketch, like Spirograph.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird.
Do you remember that one on the PlayStation where the rabbit ran along the sound waves? You put your own CD in, vib.
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I forgot that.
It kind of looks like that, and it looks a bit inky as well. More like one of your kind of Kindles.
It reminds me of a Game & Watch.
The display.
Looking at this, I mean, it is completely different to anything I've seen before. Whether or not it's something I'd actually want, and actually looking through the comments on Engadget here, the top one is, bass fishing games in 3, 2, 1. I imagine there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff on there as well. But for the price, I mean, you could actually buy 2 Nintendo DSs for the price of one of these.
You may as well put a little bit towards it and get a Switch,
Yeah, exactly. So
does the crank power it as well? That might be cool if you can.
No,
get
that
some
would be good.
extra
That would
power,
be pretty cool, like those torches and stuff, yeah.
that's the first thing I thought when I saw it. I thought, well, if you can power it by cranking it, because we've all been in situations when, your phone runs out of battery or something.
Yeah.
So if you could just wind your phone up or something, that'd be quite handy. But if you want to read more about it, I'll put a link and you can check it out in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, I think it's fair to say the Sega Mega Drive had one of the best sound chips of all time, and Rev, you're a big audio guy.
Yeah, I prefer the SID, but the Mega Drive had a banger.
Well, there is actually a Spotify playlist at the moment of some cool remixes, songs that we might know from Sega games. This in particular is one of my favourites. Recognise that, Joe?
Nah, don't say it. Don't do it.
Got a warm up for the Christmas quiz.
No, I don't know it.
Come on, Joe. You play this.
I play this.
I've played this with you.
Oh. You've played this with me.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I ain't got a clue.
One of the most famous Mega Drive games. It's a remix of
Columns.
Yeah, there you go. You just said it. You just said it. This is really good,
As soon as that little bit came in, I was like, it's Columns.
Well, this is a guy called Mitch Murder, who's actually made...
I know Mitch Murder. I don't know him.
Know of him.
I know of him.
He's one of the guys that's done one of these remixes. I mean, there's actually a bunch of them here. This guy from Reddit called Mercurius FM, he's put together a playlist of some of the best remixes of Sega Mega Drive tracks that are on Spotify. So,
Well, Spotify is actually quite a good resource for video game music. I checked quite a while ago, and I made a whole compilation list of like Alistair Brimble, Chris Holzbeck. There was a lot of people there that had actually released albums on Spotify. So check it out for gaming soundtracks and lists.
it's not the first place I'd actually go for that kind of thing, but you're right. I mean, looking at that.
You find as well, like, even just for like movie soundtracks and stuff like that, but especially game soundtracks, you go on Spotify, just type the game in or whatever, and you won't just get the music, you'll get all the demos and everything, like all the remixes, everything. It's fantastic. Like, before you know it, you'll think, oh, I'm going to get 10 songs, but you've got 37 or something like that.
Yeah, I had
It's
a list
cool.
of about 50, and they were all Amiga. Yeah, so that's just showing how niche it is,
Yeah.
and then there's so much more that you can have Sega and stuff.
Pretty good for podcasts as well, Hashtag,
Oh, yeah,
Hashtag
yeah.
just saying. We're
Just
on there
saying,
as well.
just saying.
Spotify installed. Now, while we're on that Sega vibe, you may have seen this news came in just a little bit too late for us to cover it last week, but they have unveiled another 10 games for the Mega Drive Mini. Now, it's going to be out in September. We know the release date of the Mega Drive Mini now as well. We know there's going to be 40 games on there. They've now announced 30 of them. So the new ones that they have announced now, Mega Man, The Wily Wars, Street Fighter 2, Special Champion Edition. Is that different to normal Champion Edition, Special?
Oh, God. Now you're testing me. It's not Kisses Quiz.
I I know
don't
Champion
know.
Edition, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know,
Special
actually.
Champion Edition, apparently. Sonic Spinball, which I think that game's always been a bit 50-50 with people. I really enjoyed Spinball, actually.
I like Spinball, but I've got memories of it just being so frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's only like 4 levels long as well, and I think they knew it was frustrating.
I think this list kind of will be irrelevant in the future once it gets hacked and people just shove absolutely everything on it. But I found something really interesting, which says that basically in North America you'll get a power supply.
Yeah.
So the rest of the world won't get power supplies, but North America will. I wonder why that is.
If there's some regulation or something, maybe they've got to ship with
I
power
don't know.
supplies.
I
or-
noticed that
Yeah.
somebody doing an unboxing of I think it was the SNES Mini, and they got a power supply, and I was like, I didn't get a power supply.
Maybe it's a North American
And it
rule
was a
then or
North
something.
American
Yeah,
rule.
Because
something.
when I was in America, there were guys queuing up for the PlayStation game. Where's the power supply? You know?
I mean, come on, it only costs probably 20 pence to include like little USB charger.
GameStop was selling their own, like, here.
Yeah, for $15.
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous.
Phantasy Star 4, Beyond Oasis, Ghouls and Ghosts on there as well. And that's another game that used to frustrate the hell out of me, that game. It is so difficult. Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle, Golden Axe, which
Yeah, of
has to be
course.
on there.
Got to be there.
Vector Man and Wonder Boy in Monster World. But interesting, no columns announced yet.
Is it not?
No, look at the list. That wasn't an omission,
So,
actually.
I was quite surprised, pleasantly surprised, because I assumed it's going to be the typical, all the normal Sega games which are on every single Sega compilation game.
Yeah.
But it's actually quite refreshing to see, like, we've got Castlevania Bloodlines on there, which is really nice. Gunstar Heroes, Castle and World of Illusion being one of my favourite games of all time.
Did Mega Man The Wily Wars come out over here?
It didn't come out
Oh,
on PAL.
okay, there you go.
No, so it's like I say, it's a real breath of fresh air not to just see like Streets of Rage 1, 2 and 3, Sonic 1, 2 and 3. You know, so far they've only actually announced Streets of Rage 2, so I wonder if the last 10 games are going to be the typical Golden Axe 2 and 3, Streets of Rage 1 and 3.
Stuff like Fantasy Zone as
Yeah.
well. really
Yeah,
good
it's
to have
pretty
in.
cool to see. We've got Contra Hard Corps on there as well, which I don't think came out in the UK either. I'm not too sure about that one, but I don't think that came out on PAL either, so...
That's one thing we've said about Sega. They do seem to take their retro fan base seriously, don't they?
Yeah.
They want to give them a good experience, I think. And again, it kind of shows Sony up, doesn't it? With
Yeah.
what an abysmal selection was on the PlayStation. So, will you be getting one of these? Because I know even though you've got the originals and all that, you did tend to go for these mini consoles.
Yeah, I do tend to get them. I've still not brought myself to buy a PlayStation Mini yet. I recently won some Argos vouchers, funny enough, and I was going to buy the PlayStation Mini, and at the last second I actually ended up buying Mortal Kombat 11.
Right.
But I think I will buy this one. Although, looking at it, other than Mega Man Wily Wars, I do have every other game on there, but I will still buy it.
But you can't fit it in the palm of your hand.
We can't put it in the palm of your hand, no. So I think I will still buy it. And plus, I think it's, £70 as well,
Yeah.
so not too hard to swallow, really. So
Yeah, I haven't got any of the mini consoles, but this one actually does quite appeal to me. It's my Mega Drive at the moment. It's not doing all that well. It's a bit poorly. Sometimes I boot it up and it doesn't work properly, and then probably 'cause I've got the 32X and the Mega CD and everything all stuffed into it.
Frankenstein's monster in the glass cabinet at Dan's.
Yeah, then I've got to wobble the 32X to make the connection work and
Rattling
things,
it.
So yeah, I might get one of these for convenience. Some of the games do look really good. Now, speaking about impressive games, now we've talked about the Batman group before.
Yeah, the Batman group. Oh my God, they were one of the most stunning French graphic scene groups I've ever seen. They did a demo when I was a kid. I'd probably say it wrong. Batman Valve or Valve,
Okay.
and it was the first time I'd seen full scale animated pixel drawn stuff by a demo group. This was just beautiful. It really was a stunning demo. And then they went on to do one of the pinball games. I think it was Pinball Fantasies.
Yeah, on the Amstrad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the shocking thing here is that their coding is so optimized and just so good that when they did this demo on the Amiga, it ran on a 500 and it was stunning. Now they're coming out with a game for the Amstrad and oh my God, this stuff looks stupid. It's basically a 16-bit game on an 8-bit system, isn't it?
It looks like Outrun, to be fair.
Yeah, it looks like Outrun.
Now, this is a game called Vespertino. And don't know if you've got the page open, Joe, but if you scroll down, there's a little YouTube video in the middle
Yeah,
there.
I'm watching it right now, actually.
They only show a really short clip of it. So if you go, I'll put this in our show notes as well. If you kind of skip to about 1 minute 31 in there is a little clip of it running. And bearing in mind, this is running on an Amstrad CPC 8-bit platform. How smooth does that scrolling and the graphics
25 frames per second.
The car selection bit, it looks like the original Need for Speed.
Yeah.
That's how
3D.
good it looks. Yeah.
I don't know how the heck they've done this, but one thing that they keep proving over and over again is that the Amstrad CPC was a very underrated platform. Back in the day, it generally got ports of Spectrum games that weren't even improved at all, but look at this.
Well, this is crazy. They're running a full 3D effects engine over the top of it. And, it's all full screen. Remember when you used to get this stuff, it had been a small window, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, even
just to keep the frame rate.
The fact they've got this full screen kind of Outrun clone running. I mean, I remember Outrun on the Amiga and the Atari ST, they were dreadful ports. Didn't run anywhere near as good as this.
But I'll tell you, some of the stuff we've been seeing coming out of the Amstrad scene and seeing on the Amstrad recently, it's just been mind-blowing. Like, Alan Sugarman, you should have got this back in the day.
But yeah, instead of that, console release, a GX.
Yeah.
Imagine you come out with something like this in like
smashing
1988.
the PlayStation.
Exactly, man. So, yeah, it looks incredible. And I think, someone summed it up on Facebook. I'm speechless. And
The thing is, Batman Group would be the demo that I would show my mates to have their kind of jaws hit the floor, Now,
just one more thing before we get into our chat with Amiga Bill and Anthony this week, the Guru Meditation. I don't know if you've seen this. Konami have actually released a great little compilation of some of their all-time classic arcade games. Now, they released this on Xbox One, on Switch as well, and on PlayStation 4. And I was checking this out thanks to our friends at Games You Loved. Great little compilation, mainly of their the 80s arcade games. Now, a lot of them, I mean, you'll probably quite like this, Joe, because there's a lot of like old school shoot-em-ups in this as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's by the looks of things, I'd say about 80% of the games are old school shoot-em-ups.
Yeah.
So if you're big on your shoot-em-ups, get it straight away. And then also it's got Haunted Castle on there, which is actually the Castlevania arcade game, which is quite cool.
Okay.
To see that on there. Not a good game, but it's cool to see it on there, which is quite interesting. So this is already out, isn't it?
Yeah, it just came out a couple of weeks ago. I mean, I downloaded it for the Switch the other day. But what's interesting is Konami's actually celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. That's why this is the first installment, the 80s one.
Yeah.
I imagine we're going to get more from the 90s and 2000s.
They've just released the Castlevania compilation as well, about a week ago.
Yeah.
Which has got about 8 Castlevania games on there, classic 8-bit and 16-bit ones, which is really cool as well, because it's got quite a few of the unreleased Power ones and stuff like that on it, which is pretty interesting.
It's got Twin B as well, and Twin B was like epic. I remember so many ports on different systems of Twin B.
And Scramble as well, that was like a real old school one, I think. It came out just after Defender. It's a bit of a Defender kind of clone, but, ran really impressive. So, I mean, I love the fact that you can play these arcade games on the go. It still amazes me. Even the first time I ran MAME, I was like, wow, arcades at home. Having it on my Switch is still like, I can't believe
I'm still like that.
Yeah, I am as well. So, if you want to get all these, I think it's only about 15 quid. So, it is available now on your favourite modern console of choice. Right, then we will have more news on next Friday's show. And right now, time to get into this week's special guest. We are joined by the guys from the Guru Meditation. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome our special guests this week. Now, we're going to be talking about, obviously we're big fans of the Commodore Amiga, and our guests that we've got on this week are, I was going to say YouTubers, but they're actually content creators. They do so much good stuff on Twitch, on YouTube as well. We're joined this week by Bill Winters and Anthony Becker, who you may know as the Guru Meditation. Welcome to the show, guys.
Oh, thanks so much for having us here, guys. It's really an honor to be on the show. It's my favorite podcast, so it's pretty amazing to be on my favorite podcast.
Yeah, it's my favorite too. Great you guys having us on.
Really appreciate that. Because I know, Bill, you often sent us pictures of your travels around the world, because you work all over, and I love when I get a picture of you in Times Square or something, holding up your phone with the Retro Hour logo on there.
I feel like I take you guys with me around the world. Sometimes I'm on the train to New York City, or in my car to New York, or on a plane somewhere in the world, and I always hear you guys in my ear, especially during the turbulence. It helps me out when the plane ride gets so bumpy. I put you guys on. I'm like, all right, it's all right. I'm with Dan and Robbie. It's all good.
Well, there's a question that we always ask our guests, and that was, what was your first kind of gaming or computer experience? And if we could start with Anthony and then go to Bill, that would be great.
Mine, as far as the very first would obviously be games in the arcade, things like Space Invaders, Asteroids, the old games, which illustrates how old I am, which kind of scares me. But my first system at home was the Atari 2600, aka video computer system that wasn't a computer system.
What games were you playing on that?
Oh, I'm everything. Again, same. Just like the arcade, Space Invaders, Asteroids. I loved, my favorite games on that were like the Superman, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I loved those games. I still have those cartridges. Empire Strikes Back by Parker Brothers, just I loved those games, and I still have my original Atari 2600.
What about you then, Bill? Were you much of an arcade goer back in the day?
Oh yeah, I was a huge arcade guy back then. Still am today. I love myself a good barcade. It's one of the things I do when I travel. I find the local barcade. But my first video game experience was actually at home, and it was with two consoles. One was the ColecoVision or Coleco Telstar arcade, and the other one was like this standalone Atari Breakout Pong system. And those are my first two experiences. I'm so lucky because my dad was a bit of a geek himself. He loves all the tech, so he was super supportive of me when I was growing up, and he always purchased these items for me, so I'm very thankful for him. And he ended up purchasing my Amiga for me, which we'll get into later. But these first two systems were really unique and interesting. The one from Coleco really stands out. I still have it. It was like a triangular shaped console, and each side of the console was a game. So one side had a gun, and there was like a shooting game where you would shoot the light gun at the CRT screen. There was like this little stick figure that walked across it. The other side had a steering wheel and a stick shift, so it was a driving game. And then the third side had two paddles for a classic Pong. And of course, it was this triangular-shaped system with faux wood paneling on the side of it to match the faux wood paneling that pretty much everyone had in America in their basement in the 60s and 70s. So that was my earliest gaming memory, is playing that with my dad on our CRT in the family room.
Well, I was wondering how you guys actually met then.
Oh, wow. Well, Anthony and I met back in 1989. I think Anthony can probably even tell the story a little bit better than me, but I'll just give you the broad strokes. I was running the Westchester Amiga user group, which I still run today. It's a user group that is an Amiga user group that meets in Westchester County, New York, not Westchester, Pennsylvania, where most people think it is, home of Commodore. This is Westchester County, New York, which is just north of New York City. It's a suburb of New York City. And I was running the Amiga group, and then along came this guy named Anthony, who was, seemed like a pretty cool guy, and he was funny. I got a kick out of him, and we bonded, over the Amiga, and we had a lot of the same interests. And yeah, we've been like best buds ever since. And I wasn't old enough to drive yet, so my dad would drive me to the meetings, and he would help me run the meetings. And then we applied to Commodore to become an official Commodore user group, and we did, and we got the official Commodore user group seal, and we had bylaws and the whole nine. And the group was really strong back in the day. We had like 150 active members, and we also had what we called special interest groups. So on the first Thursday of every month was a general meeting, and we just talked about anything that was going on in the Amiga scene. And then we had these special interest groups that met on the second, third, and fourth Thursday of the month. So we had a music SIG for people who were into music. We had a graphics video SIG for people who were into graphics and video, game SIG. And yeah, it was pretty impressive. Every week was something Amiga.
Well, yeah, and the graphics SIG met at Bill's parents' house. And that was one of my favorite, obviously. I mean, what got me into the Amiga was graphics. So that I hit that SIG. That was my favorite one to go to. I loved it.
Well, thinking here in the the late 80s and early 90s, the Commodore Amiga was a very big platform here. And I remember, when it got to like the early 90s, every kid at school had an Amiga 500, and we all played in the swap games and everything. I mean, I understand the scene in America was quite different over, compared to over in Europe. I mean, how did you find it over there? How did it differ?
Well, the Amiga was kind of always like underground. It was the alternative machine because all of our parents had PCs at work. And in the schools, it was mostly PC or Mac. And then there was like this other strange thing called the Amiga, which all the weirdos loved. All the artists, all the artists and gamers loved the Amiga. So it was definitely like third fiddle to the PC and the Mac. It was a little bit more underground and more specialized for people who were into graphics, video, and music.
Bill is again illustrating how old I am, because in school, when I went, high school, we got our first computer lab, and it was TRS-80 Model 3s and a Commodore PET 2001 in the physics teacher's classroom. That was our computers before I went to college, where I saw my first Mac, and I saw my first Amiga when I bumped into that mutual friend of ours who owned one, who had owned a 64 when I had it, and he showed me his 1000 and took me to Ami Expo, and then I had to get one.
Europe was very focused on kind of games, and America seemed to be more focused on applications and creativity. Can you name some of the applications and programs that you guys were using?
Oh yeah, like I said, the Amiga was really the first home computer for artists here in the States. So some of the classic programs I used to use were Deluxe Paint. It's a legendary program. It did a lot more than just painting because I'm not a very good painter, but it allowed me to do animated titles for my videos. I also used something called DigiView, which was it's basically an image digitizer that allowed you to aim a video camera at an object or a magazine piece of clip art, and you could scan it. It was a kind of a primitive scanner. I also used a program called PageStream. It was a desktop publishing program, and that's how I made the newsletters for our user group. And those were the main ones that I used: Deluxe Paint, Imagine, the 3D modeling and rendering program. Imagine, that was another big one. The Art Department Professional, which was in a way sort of like an early Photoshop. It did all sorts of image manipulation. You could change an image from color to black and white, or you could crop it, resize it, change the format from an Amiga IFF file to a JPEG, vice versa. Really, really powerful program and essential for making the newsletter.
I'll go earlier than Bill a bit, because one of the first programs I bought for my Amiga was Turbo Silver, which was Imagine before it was Imagine, and cool. I fiddled around with that for 3D ray tracing. I used programs like Excellence for word processing. Again, the stuff that predated a lot of the desktop publishing, but still it was like amazing at the time. You come from a Commodore 64 where you were just getting the start of this stuff with GEOS, and all of a sudden you have these amazing word processors and paint programs. Those programs were just incredible at the time.
I love the fact that you guys mentioned 3D rendering as well. 'Cause I remember trying to do, single frame renders in like software like Imagine or Lightwave, and you'd have to leave your computer on for like 2 or 3 days. It would
that was
forever.
the whole reason. It was the whole reason I bought a Sega Genesis, was so that I could still play games while my 2000 was sitting there rendering like one image in Turbo Silver or one landscape in Vista Pro.
And ray tracing seems to be the thing that everybody's talking about in PCs and the graphics cards, and we were doing that all back in the days, weren't we?
Oh yeah, I'll never forget one of the first demos I saw on the Amiga was the Amiga Juggler, and that was all done with ray tracing, and that was a system seller for me. When I saw the Juggler, I was like, man, that's what I want to do. I want to create images and animations that look like that.
Well, over here, we went into like any high street electronics store, like with Dixon's, Curry's, Comet, and you'd have big displays with Amigas set up, running games and everything. What about over there? What were your local dealers like? Where would you purchase your machines from and the hardware for them?
We were really lucky because we had a store here in White Plains called Software Link, and it was a dedicated Commodore store. So it was also, not only did they sell the computers and the software, but it was also a meeting place. And one of the things that I always say comes with the Amiga, it's not just about the computer, it's about the community that's around that computer. So that's where we had our user group meetings. It's where you could go and check out the latest software, and while you're there hanging out, there'll be someone else coming in, and then you start talking to that person and you become friends with that person. So it was almost like a meeting hub of the Amiga community. It was a store just for Commodore and Amiga stuff. It wasn't like you had to go to like a Toys R Us or a large department store to get the Amiga. You went to this small specialty shop that had a community with it.
Yeah, you pretty much, and you say like, it's great, we had a store here in White Plains, and you think, okay, wow, it's in the big city close to us was this store. And if you looked at the business district of White Plains, basically where the store was at the very edge of the business district. Like you had to go as far as you could without hitting people's houses to get to this store. It was, you had to know where it was. You had to be of one of the, one of almost the Illuminati, that you knew, you got the information from someone else and he told you where this place was and to go find it. But we were still so lucky because, and I've made a friend now down here in Florida, and he said basically is like, you just could not get the Amiga down here.
One of your videos absolutely amazed me because you keep referring to this place called Das Bunker, which is basically it's a basement, but it's full of amazing Amiga stuff. You had the original Joy board in there, and you've got some really rare items. just talk us through a few and how you kind of came to acquire these items.
And I'm going to ask, explain what the joyboard is for people who might not know.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like we should be doing a different different talk than Amigas. But, well, Joyboard was one of the two things. And one of my favorite joysticks. When I had the Atari 2600, obviously, generally you would invariably always break the crummy Atari joystick, and then you would go to your local store and search for a replacement. And I picked up this little tiny joystick called the Power Stick. And I used that with the 2600. I used it with my Commodore 64. I used it with my Amiga. And it was when I already had my second Amiga, because I bought a 500 myself, and then I got a 2000 on a student discount plan from Commodore. And one day I'm sitting waiting for a game to load, floppy disks and all that. And I'm just turning the joystick over, and I see it says Amiga Corporation on the back. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, Amiga Corporation, and I'm using it on an Amiga. That's really interesting, but the logo's different. The company name looks different. Like, okay, this is interesting. I wonder if it's the same company. It turns out it is, because it's what Amiga Corporation did while they were developing the Amiga, was to sell joysticks, controllers, and some games for the Atari 2600, because it was super popular at the time, and it was a way they could both make some income as well as hide what the company was doing, because it looked like just another, look, they make things for that little cartridge system over there. They're no one to worry about. And one of the other things they made was the Joyboard. That leads us to Dust Bunker, because what basically happened was, of course, I was obviously a Commodore person, an Amiga person when they were popular, and then when Commodore went bankrupt and went out of business, and people started getting rid of stuff, and Atari 2600s were old. I would pop on eBay, I would pop on news groups every now and then and just see what people were getting rid of for not much money, stuff that I couldn't afford. I mean, you go to an AMI Expo, you'd see a video card, it would be like $1,000. DMI Resolver, those Texas Instruments based graphics cards, they were thousands of dollars. It's like, this is more than my computer cost. This is awesome, but there's no way I could afford it. Now you see one up on eBay for $20, $30, and you're like, I have a job now. And $20, $30 is a drop in the bucket. I'll pick it up. And I ended up, I think I had about 7 Amiga 1000s.
Wow.
You can never have too many.
That I don't think I bought 7. I think they reproduced in my basement. I think it got to a point, it's like a nuclear reactor, where it was, I reached a critical mass of Amiga and Commodore equipment where it would just create new Amiga and Commodore equipment.
Were you feeding them after midnight?
How do you know if you are or not? Because it's always after midnight, isn't it?
Well, I mean, before we started talking, you had your camera on for a moment, and I actually thought your background was CGI, because you had that much stuff there. It looked amazing. I mean, talk us through some of the stuff you've got, because I know, actually, watching your videos, you've actually got this system called a Commodore 65.
Yes.
Tell us about the 65 and how you got this.
How I got this is I actually still even have the receipt for my Commodore. I'm probably one of the few people in the world that actually has a receipt for their Commodore 65. I was on a service called Genie. It was a lot like CompuServe, AOL, with basically in the days on my 2000, Commodore had gone out of business. In the liquidation of Commodore, every now and then you'd see ads in a magazine where these companies like Protecto, Liage would be getting rid of stuff. And one day I see these ads for basically it's the motherboard, the keyboard for the Commodore 65. So I pick each one up. I think it was like $70 total for a keyboard and a motherboard. And I figure with a 64, that's all you need. That is a Commodore 64. And while I'm on Genie one day, what would happen is every now and then we get bored. And there was an Amiga section and a Commodore 64 section. And when we're bored, we would decide to raid the Commodore 64. It would be like kind of like a raid in Twitch now, where you basically take everyone from the channel and you go over to the other channel. You all just start suddenly saying things, and then you all suddenly leave. It's kind of what computer nerds do to thrill themselves. And I was over there and I started chatting with some of the CMD people. And I was just asking questions like, I'm always interested in hooking a floppy drive up to it. And I understand it's a 1581. And I'm just wondering if anyone knows like the pinout of the floppy port. And they're like, oh, we have some Commodore 65s in the back. We'll sell you one for $40. So I bought a Commodore 65 for $40 from CMD. I have a receipt and everything. And when I got it, it was supposed to not be working. And everything I buy that doesn't work, the first thing I do is plug it in and turn it on, because I figure I can't hurt it. And I turned it on. It worked fine. And yeah, it's crazy. And you buy it because you think it's $40. It's a curiosity. $40 is not a bad price for something that's worth nothing. It's a computer that never came out.
The Commodore 65, for people that might not be familiar with it, this was probably Commodore's last 8-bit machine. It was a prototype they made in the early 90s. It was meant to be a successor to the Commodore 64. Never got released, and I think the last one I saw on eBay went for something like about £2,000 over here, I think.
Actually, it was a successor to the 128.
Yeah.
And it was in development, and as I've spoken to a few Commodore engineers, they always scratch their head and like, I don't know why Commodore was even looking at this thing. You had Amiga already. It was a dead end, but that was and it's amazing how completed it was. And I honestly think it's one of the most beautiful Commodore 8-bit machines, just the casework, the look of it, how they integrated the floppy drive. I think it was a pretty awesome machine. It was kind of too bad it was never finished. 256 colors. It was basically a bit more capable than the 500 because it could even display out of a palette of 4,096 colors, 256 colors. But obviously, it would never be able to attain like the speeds. There was no upgrade path to it. That you have with the Amigas, so it was like a dead end machine, but it was amazingly complete. It seemed really close to release. One of the big issues the 65 had was that the 64 emulation, being more like in software, was never really finished, so it wasn't very 64 compatible, not like the 128.
Now, back in the days, probably for our listeners, nowadays you can just go onto Final Cut or you can go onto Premiere and just drop in a sequence, edit your video straight away. Back in the days, we used to have 2 huge video decks. You'd have your Amiga, all of the inputs coming in, and then you'd have a master output, and you'd have to kind of live mix it and cut between this video toaster stuff. Did you guys ever kind of get to use video toasters? Because we never had them because they were PAL. They were NTSC, and we could never actually run the PAL versions here. I don't think they ever actually released a PAL version.
Yeah, the video toaster was basically the holy grail of add-ons for the Amiga here in the States. Yes, and we did get our hands on them. We never owned one, but we actually had an alpha version of the video toaster at our December 1990 Westchester Amiga user group meeting. We had our friend Rick, who worked for MTV. He was a beta tester for NewTek, and he brought in a toaster system along with our friend Rob, and they demoed it for us. And it was like that. It was one of those moments in time that you'll never forget. The first time we saw this Amiga doing live video switching, everyone was just floored. My friend Al was an editor for ABC at the time, and I'll just never forget the look on his face. He was just looking at the toaster saying, we have $120,000 switcher at ABC Studios, and it can't do half the things that I'm seeing this video toaster and Amiga do. It was absolutely breathtaking and stunning. And I think here in the States, I would say the toaster is sort of what defined the Amiga. And I didn't really realize that until now, because I work in the television business now, and then when I tell people about my hobby, I love vintage computers and Amigas. When they hear Amiga, they go, "Oh, Amiga? Oh, isn't that the video toaster?" So it's no, obviously it's not, but they're so closely knit and so closely related. When people hear Amiga, they immediately think video toaster here in the States. And yeah, it was a live video switcher, and it also did compositing, and it had an amazing 3D modeling program called Lightwave 3D, which is still around today, and Newtek, the company, is also still around today. But it was, a lot of people think the toaster was an editor, and it was really just a switcher. They did come out with a nonlinear editing system that worked with the toaster, and it was called the Video Flyer.
And I remember reading at the time that, TV shows like Babylon 5 were made using the video toaster and Lightwave, and, the effects in those look stunning for the time.
Right. Sequest DSV also, I think, was made with Lightwave.
Yep, they all started out on Lightwave, and if you go into like any public access channel here in the United States in the early 90s, and chances are they had a video toaster there, and they used them for the channel preview guides at our local cable channels. So every now and then you'd go turn on your TV and you would see a guru meditation pop up on the screen because the toaster had crashed. It was awesome.
and that's the other cool thing, is there's actually people on the internet trying to like resurrect the old preview system to something where you could use the software and like load your cable company's TV schedule and basically have it run on your Amiga or an emulated Amiga on the old preview software.
That's awesome, man. I know that, Bill, you're a professional cinematographer now, and you do lots of filming, and I wonder how much of the Amiga actually is part of that, getting you into that position.
The Amiga is key to getting me where I am now in my career. Like I said, my dad's always been super supportive, and he teaches communications. He teaches television and radio production. So growing up as a kid, I always had a video camera in the house, starting out with an old 3/4 inch system and then a VHS system. So I was just shooting video all the time since I was a little kid in the late 70s. But then when the Amiga came out, it took it to a whole nother level. I hooked up a Genlock. I had a Rock Gen for my Amiga, which allowed me to make titles for my videos. I would hook up two VCRs and do linear analog video editing, VCR to VCR, and I would use the Amiga for all the special effects. I would use it for all my titles. I would render 3D animations with it. I would do. I also had a chroma key for it, so I used the Amiga to express myself creatively and to help make my videos. And when I submitted a portfolio to film school, some of the stuff in that portfolio I made on the Amiga. So it played a really big role in shaping my cinematography career. And now, when I first got into the business, we were shooting on film, but now most of us just shoot on digital cameras, which are essentially computers with lenses on them. So all of my background with the Amiga and Genlocks and my technical computer background has really come into play now because, like I said, the cameras are basically computers with lenses on them. So you need to have a lot of artistic sensibility. You need to be able to tell a story and light, but then you also need to have a lot of technical knowledge and skill to actually run the cameras these days. And
you've worked with some very big clients as well, Bill.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I've had a pretty good run here. Some things that you guys might know. I started the show Camus and Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. I've done work. I did Justin Timberlake and the Tennessee Kids. That's on Netflix. A lot of Netflix stuff. And a lot of television promos. Just shot the opening to the Major League Baseball playoffs. That was really, really successful. It just won some Emmy Awards. I've been super lucky to have the amazing career that I've had. It's literally taken me all around the world. I've been to pretty much every continent now except Antarctica. And I've gotten to experience the world through this amazing career of mine. And, I've shot the launch video for like the iPhone 3 back in the day. I've done a lot of work for Apple. I've done a lot of work for some work for Google, Samsung, a lot of the big tech companies, as well as, other companies like Nike and Volkswagen, a lot of Volkswagen stuff, Heineken. So it's been an awesome ride.
Well, one movie that you were involved with recently, I know you guys were involved with their Viva Amiga, and we had Zach on the show, and that was a great, tribute to the Amiga. And there's been quite a few of those movies recently. But how did you go about getting involved in that? And did you get all your old collection out? And I know there's some beautiful cinematography in that with dramatic lighting and everything as well.
Raid Das Bunker.
Yeah.
Oh, we definitely raided Das Bunker. And Bill's actually the one. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he can speak a lot more to it. It was from, us, when we go to Vintage Computer Festival, Bill brings his camera. It's always a big deal. And, the guys there are always, very interested in cameras. And I think it was kind of through that maybe. But I know one day Bill calls me up. And of course, where are you going to look for Amiga stuff? Zach wanted, just some, what Bill calls B-roll, as if I would know what the hell that is, of like distressed, old, thrown out Amiga equipment. And I'm like, well, shoot, I can raid Dust Bunker. I'm sure I can find some stuff in bad shape. So we found like the most yellowed Amiga 1000 keyboard we could grab. I had like an empty Amiga 1000 case. It just basically all the distressed odds and ends, little bits, stuff that looked broken, missing, covers. And we basically, went and grabbed some shots at an old abandoned strip mall, and then and then again getting a call from Bill. It's like, all right, now he wants to do some like studio shots of some equipment. So again, it's like, okay, raid Dust Bunker, get like the best looking Amiga 1000 I have, and a whole bunch of other machines which we brought to Bill's dad's TV studio where he teaches. And Zach, we basically spent a whole day with Zach and, him, getting shots that, and then so when I watched that movie, I'm like, oh, that's a mellow yellow, the yellow keyboard, and that's my 1000, and that's there's a, it's like awesome to watch that video and know that like your equipment's in there.
Yeah. So being a filmmaker, I'm always looking for a subject to make something about, and of course, the Amiga was one of the first things that came to mind. I said, I wonder if anyone's ever made a documentary about the Amiga. So I just started Googling, Commodore Amiga documentary, and up popped Zach's Viva Amiga Kickstarter, and the Kickstarter had ended, and I was like, oh man, I probably missed the boat on this one, but I'm gonna reach out to this guy Zach and see, if he needs any help, or just make contact with him. He's a filmmaker as well, and he likes the Amiga, so maybe we'll hit it off. So I sent a message to Zach, and then like an hour later he writes back, and he's like, dude, I actually haven't finished the film yet, and I need help in the final stretch. We need to shoot the scene, the end of the Amiga scene, the sad Amiga scene. He's like, and I could really use some help. So I was like, oh, perfect. I'd love to be a little part of this documentary. So like Anthony said, there was this old abandoned shopping mall that I used to drive by all the time, and I was like, man, this would just be a really cool location to shoot something. And whenever I see a cool location, I would just put it in the back of my head and store it away for a future shoot. So I was like, I know I got the perfect spot. We'll get some of Anthony's old Amigas, and we'll put them in this old abandoned shopping mall, and it'll look like the early 90s when the Commodore came crashing down. So we went and we shot that for Zach, and we did the studio shoot with some of Anthony's good looking Amigas, and then Zach has just become a really good friend of mine. And we said, this is great. I'm so glad that I was able to be a part of Viva Amiga, towards the end, but we want to do something from the beginning together that we can really like sink our teeth in and take the project from start to finish. So now Zach and I are working on a film called Arcadia, which is a history of arcades. Zach is directing it, and I'm shooting it for him. And yeah, it's gonna be a long-term project because it's quite a massive subject to tackle. But we've already done a bunch of shooting for it, and they've come out great. And it's been awesome going into some of these old arcades and spending time with Zach. He's become a really good friend of mine.
We had Zach on talking about Arcadia, actually, and telling us about some of the amazing machines. Well, one thing that we mainly know you and Anthony for is the Guru Meditation, which is your amazing YouTube channel. And one of the videos that I absolutely love is where Anthony is doing a talk on the Amiga 4000, and then the kind of original designers walk in as you're dissing the Amiga 4000. What was it like?
That's going to follow me
devs?
around forever. It was interesting because I would always, whenever at Vintage Computer Festival, they would have some Commodore engineers, because a lot of the engineers, or at least a decent number of them, still kind of live in that area. They're around. So, you'll go to this computer festival, you might see Dave Haney there, you might see Bill Hurd there. They had so they basically did a bunch of years. They did each sort of era of Commodore. They had Chuck Peddle was supposed to be there, but he had to be on Skype because he had to go back to, I believe it was Sri Lanka he was in for a business of his. And then the next time around, they had like a whole panel of, some of the other talks, and they had, the second one I think was Bill Hurd, and then they had Dave Haney in the Amiga year. So it's like you've already seen these people, and so it's not a surprise to see Bill Hurd around. And at this point, you pretty much recognize him. You're always saying hello. And I knew he was involved in 8-bit generation, and he was doing the showing of 8-bit generation was in a tent right outside that room that I was in, doing a just a little informational talk of you got yourself an Amiga, and you're trying to figure out like what might be wrong with it. What are some resources you could look at to try to diagnose maybe what's wrong with that machine you pulled out of your closet after a long time and it won't turn on, or so I went through a whole lot of resources that I found on the internet. And I think the second I hit some information of that, if the audio in your 4000 stops working, it's because this capacitor was installed backwards. To look at that capacitor, because that causes that capacitor apparently to fail much sooner than it really should. And Bill disappeared like that moment. And I'm like, okay, he's doing a screening across the way. That's nothing unheard of. Until a little later, he's back in the room, and he speaks up. And I'd actually seen Greg Berlin. I did not recognize him, and he's actually in. Anybody who watches the Deathbed Vigil video, he's the guy sitting on the floor pulling RAM chips out of a tower machine to take them home. He said, I'm finally, taking something. I'm taking some RAM chips. I had seen him looking over some of my machines while I was setting up, and he had actually said he had worked at Commodore. And, we didn't speak much. We just spoke a little, because then I guess he probably went across to that tent. And when he spoke, basically, I love the fact that he simply, the first thing he said was, well, he's wrong.
And you're not going to argue with him, are you?
Well, and I always tell people about something that happened later is now, I mean, this is an amazing thing to me, is you got the guy who designed the machine. He's looking in my 4000 to find his initials silk screened on the motherboard. And then he's trying to figure out what might be wrong with it. And he reaches in the 4000 and he starts with the machine on, just pushing down with his finger on the center of the motherboard, flexing it. And my first reaction is I'm ready to tell this person, what the hell are you doing? Get away from my machine.
Be careful.
And I stopped up short. First of all, he's so much taller than me. And that was the first thing when Bill Hurd said he was the designer, was you got this tall guy standing there, and I was looking for the first window to jump out of to get out of the room. And it's the guy who, I mean, how many of these machines he touched in his career? Who am I to tell him don't push on the motherboard with your finger?
But it's your 4000.
Oh, yeah, well, I still controlled myself because I wasn't about to bat his hand away.
Well, there's another incredible video that Ravi and I both loved on your channel, and that was when you went to see the artist in New York, a lady who's 83 years old, Samia Halaby, and she's an artist who uses the Amiga in her work. So how did you meet up with her, and tell us a bit about her then for people that may not have seen the video?
Well, it's a pretty incredible story. Samia and I have a mutual friend who we met, and this mutual friend, she's very much in the art community, and she's very much into Amiga. She's into electronic music, and she was making an album and using the Amiga, and she needed an Amiga she always heard of the Amiga, and she always wanted to make some electronic music with the Amiga, and she had an idea to make this album, and she was looking for someone who had an Amiga that she could borrow. So I met up with her, and Anthony had a spare Amiga 600.
There might be one in Dust Bunker somewhere.
Yeah. So Anthony loaned this woman Sana his Amiga 600, and she took it and made this really cool album with it. And she introduced me to this woman named Samia Halaby. And she said, I have this friend named Samia. She's, a world-renowned painter, and she did some artwork on the Amiga, and she wants to preserve them because all of her work is on floppy disks. So I was like, no problem. Like Anthony and I know how to do that. We'll go down and create some ADF files for her. And I was doing a little bit of research on Samia because I didn't know anything about her. And it turns out she's a world-renowned painter, and she does this incredible artwork on the Amiga. So I was like, you know what, this woman sounds really interesting. Like maybe I should bring the video camera. So I was like, let's go down. We'll rescue her discs, and I'll bring the video camera, and we'll do a little shoot with her if she's up for it.
Yeah, he brought the video camera. I brought the 1200 and the PCMCIA CF adapter card.
And wow, and we had no idea what we were getting into. Sammy is one. Yeah, she is just one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life. She's also become like a very close friend of mine. She's basically still has her Amiga 1000, set up in her studio down in Tribeca. And what it is she, back when she was 50 years old in 1985 when the Amiga came out, she was looking for a new art form, a new way to express herself. So she bought this Amiga 1000, and she didn't want to use a program like Deluxe Paint because she's like, I already do actual paintings. I'm not looking to just do a digital version of it. She's like, I want this machine to actually create the art for me. So she learned, and the machine would be part of the art itself. So she taught herself how to code in BASIC and then later C++. And she basically programs these pieces of art that it's basically like the demo scene. Yeah. She makes all these algorithms that make all these incredible patterns on the screen, and it looks like something out of the demo scene. And what she does is she takes different variables and plugs them into her algorithms to make different patterns on the screen, and she assigns these numbers to different macro keys on the keyboard. And she has another artist named Kevin Nathaniel play along with her. He plays all this world music, and as he's playing the music, she changes the images on the screen, and then while she's changing the images on the screen, he alters the music, and it's something called kinetic painting that they do, and it's really a sight to behold. So I brought the camera. I started asking Samia questions about her artwork and about her involvement in the Amiga. And yeah, and it's up on YouTube. It's called 81-year-old artist creates art with her Amiga. About a few months back, she actually did a whole presentation at the Guggenheim Museum here in Manhattan, which is a very prestigious museum. She did a retrospective of her painting and her work with the Amiga. And just last week, she did a performance of the kinetic painting at an auditorium here in Manhattan as well. And her Amiga juices are flowing. And someone had seen the video, a gentleman named Roberto Rogol, and he's like, you know what, this woman needs an Amiga 1200. She needs to upgrade from the 1000. So he actually sent her an Amiga 1200, and we're in the process of getting the 1200 set up for Samia so she can use a 1200 and do some AGA graphics and bring the 1200 with her as she does her kinetic paintings around the city.
That's awesome. And one subject that you covered on your channel, which I think is a very kind of, it's the question that everybody asks about Amiga. And you went off to an Amiga Polish event, Ami Party, and there was David Pleasance, the former managing director of Commodore UK, and Trevor Dickinson. And they did a talk on why the Amiga failed, why Commodore failed, actually. And that was really interesting. Were you pretty shocked to hear about the kind of incompetencies of Commodore?
No, we lived it.
Yeah.
I mean, we would always sit there. I remember a lot of times just having talks in the users group about like, why don't we see ads on TV? Like, we know how amazing this machine is. We're meeting once a month and sometimes more than once. We're using it every day. I mean, why does no one else know about this? Why are people are exalting this Mac, which is like black and white, single task, like just pathetic if you used an Amiga. Like why is this not and have any traction? And then you see the video toaster come out and you're like, oh yeah, finally we'll see something, and it's like still nothing. And then it kind of, you start hearing like the rumors that Commodore is in trouble. Well, it's not like that big a surprise. You're kind of like hope that someone will buy them, and it just, like I said, hearing them, it's nice to. I almost I hate to use the term because it's so overused, closure, but you kind of get this little bit of closure, like, oh yes, that's exactly what I thought the problem was. I'm glad I know I was right.
Well, for the final question, I was kind of wondering, it's been 30 years since you set up that Amiga group, and it still seems like it's going strong. I was wondering what you guys think of the Amiga scene at the moment, and what keeps you interested in it?
Well, what keeps us interested in it is, what keeps me interested in it is, I think it's because it was a computer from a simpler time, but it was also the first real computer. Like, there were times, like Commodore 64, I like it. It's like a Nintendo. You would turn it on, you'd throw a disc in, you load up the game you're going to play, then you shut it off, you turn it on, you load up the next thing you were going to play, or the word processor or whatever. Now you had a computer that, there were times I turned on my Amiga, was not even to play any game, not to type a letter, not to do any of this stuff. It was just to fiddle around with the startup sequence. Maybe I can, how can I get this to work a little better? Oh, there's a new JPEG decoder. Let me throw it on there. Once you have a hard drive, this was a computer you could use just to be a computer. To me, I thought that was amazing looking back at it. Now you do this stuff every day on like a Windows machine, where you might load some new updates and things, but back then it was unheard of to do stuff like that. So it's just such an amazing thing, almost like an eye opener, that a computer itself could be something that you would use just to be a computer, and I loved that, and that's why I basically never left it, really.
The Amiga scene today is absolutely booming. I mean, it is incredible. Yesterday did a Twitch stream, and it was the premiere of a brand new Amiga game called Reshooter, and it was the excitement for this game was just like off the charts. There were like hundreds of people watching, and we had an absolute blast. But that was just like one piece of the puzzle. There's the renewed interest in Amiga. I think Amiga and retro is in right now. There's a huge renewal of interest in it. So basically the user group is a reflection of that. Back in the heyday when Amiga was cutting edge, obviously it was the best time for the user group. We had about 150 active members. And then after Commodore failed and, PC took over, the numbers dropped dramatically. In the early 2000s, we basically got 4 people at our meetings. We never stopped meeting, but it was basically like Anthony, I, and a couple other guys. And now the meetings are getting popular again. We have 30 active members. We get anywhere between like 15 and 20 people at our monthly meetings, and we meet every month. And it's amazing to see. But now the difference now is the internet. Back then, the way you could connect with other Amiga users is by going to the user group, and that was about it. I mean, sure,
and magazines.
And magazines. But now with the internet and YouTube and Twitch and social media and all the online forums, the Amiga community is now connected. So now we are connected to Europe. We understand what's going on in Europe. I've made amazing friends who from the Amiga scene in Europe. I go to Ami Party and I visit those guys. They're incredible. And things like YouTube and Twitch have just brought the Amiga community together. And there's just so many like exciting things happening in the community now. I feel like every week there's a new game coming out. There's guys like the Vintage Computer Society in Athens are making like new joysticks for the Amiga. Then you got guys like John Chucky Ertel, who's like making new motherboards for the Amiga, and guys making new accelerator cards for the Amiga. Like there's just so much happening right now. It feels like it's like 1990 all over again. It's absolutely incredible.
Speak of the hardware, I mean, I just purchased a brand new 2 meg internal RAM upgrade with battery back clock for my 500. Well, like, would you ever think we're nearing 2020? Like buying a brand new board for an Amiga 500 it's insane. It's wonderful.
And long may it continue.
Creative mind.
Yeah. Well, look, the Amiga scene's incredible now, guys. And you guys have done, so much for it, documenting it and covering it as well. I mean, if people haven't checked out your channel, The Guru Meditation, and your Twitch channel as well, Bill, I'll put a link in our show notes this week. Ravi and I have been lifelong fans of the Amiga. We could nerd out with you guys for another 10 hours easily, but, we've really enjoyed having you on the podcast this week. Thank you so much for coming on.
The honor was ours, guys. Thanks so much. And you guys are partially responsible for The Guru Meditation, because when I saw your YouTube channels originally, I was like, wow, there's people who are interested in the Amiga on YouTube, and these guys are really cool. Maybe we should put some more videos up there too. So thank you guys.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, to be 100% honest, I would say you're the second podcast that I've ever religiously listened to. just like the second I heard it, I was like, yeah, this is such quality. It's just one of the best.
Really appreciate that, guys. It really means a lot.
Oh, fine praise indeed. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
absolutely.